Welcome to Nobody Told Me. I'm Laura Owens.
And I'm Jan Black.
Joining us on this episode is Humble the Poet, a Canadian school teacher and musician turned philosopher, blogger, and author of the book Unlearn, 101 Simple Truths for a Better Life. Unlearn was originally crowdfunded and self-published and became a bestseller.
Unlearn has now been re-released by HarperCollins and is loaded with wisdom about things like love, anxiety, fear, trust, happiness, success, and other issues that serve as either barriers or pathways to joy and reaching our potential. Humble the Poet, welcome to Nobody Told Me.
Thank you so much for having me.
I have to ask, how did you get the name Humble the Poet?
The long story short is I grew up in a heritage that talked about our ego being an enemy of our peace. And, when I was on my own spiritual journey, I kind of simplified that to, being humble. So focus on being humble and being a little nerd on the internet. That was my screen name everywhere. And then I got involved in hip-hop and different hip-hop websites. And then it evolved from that to Humble the Poet as I got into music and writing. And I didn't want to be known as a rapper, because when people hear the word rapper, they jump to like 10 conclusions. And hip-hop is just modern poetry. So I took the moniker The Poet. And then the first time I told a group of guys that name, they all thought it was a horrible name. So out of spite, I kept it. This was right before social media handles, right before everything else. So I'm sure a shorter name would have worked a lot better. And I came up with it long before I ever thought I'd become a public figure. So I guess it's destiny manifested.
So how did spoken word poetry become such a big part of your life, and how did you go from being a teacher to becoming that influential figure?
I literally went to a concert. I was working as a teacher, and I went to a concert, and the opening act was a spoken word poet. And I had never heard of spoken word poetry, and I was just intrigued by watching the performance and knowing I could write, and always thinking, you like to write poetry, but you don't like to read the poetry because it kind of feels a little bit boring. And spoken word was kind of a reaction to that, which was like 90% of the magic is how you say the words instead of simply reading them off a piece of paper. So I fell in love with the art of spoken word poetry, and it just got me so excited to write more and more. And I mean, it was a great way to break the ice with girls. It was a great way to scratch that creative itch. I was a young guy with some free time now that I started a brand new job. So I used to go to coffee shops and perform at the competitions and go to the open mic nights. And I went there to meet people and to have fun. And slowly it took a life of its own. I got into music after that when I was trying to write with music in the background. It just felt like a natural fit. And then things slowly evolved to the point where I was a local celebrity in Toronto.
Humble, how did the book Unlearn come about, and why did you choose the title Unlearn?
When I was a school teacher, I was making all of this art for fun. And it was just something I was doing after work. And eventually I started meeting people in the entertainment industry and not realizing that they were not going to treat me the same as, people at the school have treated me, or just all my experiences up to that point. And I ended up leaving my job thinking I had a record deal on the table. And, without doing any due diligence, without, reading between the lines or getting a lawyer to look at my paperwork, I quit my job and moved out of my family's home. I took an apartment that I owned, and I had a tenant living in there. I kicked them out, and I moved in thinking I was going to make music full time, and I was going to live this dream. And it took about 12 months of denial to realize that money from the record deal was never coming. And I had just accrued a boatload of debt. I was in about $80,000 of debt. I had no money, but also had no ways of making money. I'd quit my job for the past year, and I was on my own. The people that had made these promises had been long since gone, and I really felt like I was a victim of the world. Blamed everybody else, for either not warning me or for betraying me, breaking my heart. And it was just a very dark place. And I spent 2 weeks in bed, self-medicating on muscle relaxers and NyQuil and anything else to kind of numb the pain, hoping somebody would come save the day. Nobody came, but I think after a while, I regained a little bit of strength. I think I healed a little bit from the immediate trauma of realizing that I was in a lot of trouble. And I started giving myself some straight talk, and it was just like, hey, we got to figure this out. No one else is going to figure it out but us. Let's make this happen. Part of that process was having to face things and take responsibility. I began writing my experiences, my thoughts, and my feelings about everything until they actually helped me feel better. And then the next step was to share that with my community. I had built a big community online at this point, And I began sharing the lessons that I was learning along the way. So realized that, hey, I'm haunted by my regrets because I haven't learned from them. My anxieties only exist in the future that may or may not come. And I only find happiness and peace in the present. And sharing these ideas nice and simply, because I was a third grade teacher teaching 8-year-olds, as well as a rapper putting words together regularly, I really connected with people once I shared it. And it was actually my community that had come up with the idea. Like slowly, the top comments used to be, wow, Humble, you're telling my story. Wow, I've been there. Wow, it's like you're living in my head. And the comments started changing to, you should write a book. You should share these writings in a book. I'd buy it. And at the same time, I was in a challenging situation. So I was like, look, I don't have the money or the time to write a book. I have to figure out my life. I have mortgage payments to make. I have some real life stuff I'm dealing with. And the community stepped up and somebody sent me a message saying, hey, I can teach you how to use Adobe InDesign. That's how you'll build your book. Here are some articles on self-publishing. Here's a website that you can use. And the whole entire process felt so collaborative with a community of people I had never met. And I decided to call it Unlearn because I was realizing at this point that I didn't need to learn any new skills to improve the way I felt about life. I had to let go of a lot of old, stale ideas. I had a lot of expectations of the world that I probably shouldn't have had. And I tried to realize that they came from media, religious upbringing, culture, society, what we see in the movies, and realizing the more I let go, the lighter I felt. So I realized that, hey, I always had what I needed to live the life I wanted to live, and so do other people. And it's just that life starts to pile a whole bunch of stuff on top of us, and then we forget where we start and it ends. And so Unlearn was motivated by the idea that, hey, letting go is gaining. And taking it from there, I ended up crowdfunding the book, and we raised a great amount of money for the book and ended up self-publishing it. And the rest is history.
We always like to tell our Nobody Told Me listeners about things that can make your lives better.
Could listening make you a better parent, a better leader, even a better person? Could listening to motivating fitness programs get you fit? Could listening inspire you to start something new? There's never been a better time to start listening on Audible.
With Audible, you get access to an unbeatable selection of audiobooks, including bestsellers, mysteries, thrillers, memoirs, and motivational books like 168 Hours by one of our favorite guests, Laura Vanderkam.
Audible has the largest selection of audiobooks on the planet, and now with Audible Originals, the selection has gotten even more custom with content made for members.
Audible members can choose 3 titles every month. 1 audiobook and 2 Audible originals you can't hear anywhere else. Audible members also get access to exclusive audio fitness programs.
Listen on any device, anytime, anywhere, at home, at the gym, on your commute, or just on the go. You'll also enjoy easy audiobook exchanges, rollover credits, and an audiobook library you keep forever, even if you cancel.
Audible, the most inspiring minds, the most compelling stories, the best place to listen. Get started with a 30-day trial when you go to audible.com/nobodytoldme or text Nobody Told Me to 500-500.
Go to audible.com. Again, that's Audible, AUDIBLE.com/Nobody Told Me, or text Nobody Told Me to 500-500 and listen for a change.
You hear of a lot of people who have that dream of wanting to have their goals crowdfunded and, try and gain a support system for what their dream is. And most of them don't get it done. So what do you think it was about you that resonated with this worldwide audience and made your dreams come true?
I think it was probably my timeline. My timeline was a lot longer than most people want. Most people have very high expectations, but they have very low patience. Mm-hmm. I had an audience of about 60,000 followers on Facebook. This is probably back in 2011. And that audience was made by sharing my art. That was probably made over about 2-3 years. So once I had made this audience, when I crowdfunded the book, it was only about 300 people who contributed to the crowdfunding campaign. And that ended up being about $26,000.
How did HarperCollins then come to pick it up?
So about 2 years independently, I was selling it just on Amazon. There's a self-publishing service I was using. And then my art, my music, the other art, I was making short films at the time. My social media had been growing, so I've been working as an influencer as well. I got on a TV show in Canada called Canada Reads. And to best explain the show, it's like Think Survivor for books, where a bunch of public figures are debating books, and every episode another book is voted off. But it's Canadian, so even if your book is voted off, you get to stay and join the debate. So I was invited to be on the show.
That's nice.
And, yeah, such a Canadian show. I love it. And I was invited to be on the show, not for my book, just as a public figure, and I had to pick a different book and defend it. And it was me and 4 other public figures from all walks of life. There was a war hero, there was an opera singer, there was an actress, there was a singer. And we all just picked books that were near and dear to us. I picked a book called 15 Dogs. And I just liked it because it was about dogs, which I love, and taking place in the city of Toronto, which is my home. And it was an interesting book, and I feel like I defended it very well. I ended up winning the show. And because my book won, that got me a lot of attention in the publishing world. And then they realized, hey, this guy had already written the book. So many of the publishers had reached out to me in Canada to publish a new book. And I had told them, I said, hey, I wrote this book Unlearn. This book has always connected with anybody who's opened it. I would love to bounce it off your trampoline. You guys are a bigger platform. I would love to bounce it off. And actually, at that point, all the Canadian publishers passed. They said, we're not really interested in republishing an old book. We want something brand new. And I pretty much said, hey, I'm working on some music right now. Writing a book is really, really hard. So, maybe I'll get back to you. And what ended up happening was a bookstore in Canada by the name of Indigo. They eventually reached out and said, hey, we love your book. We love it as is. We'd like to make some tweaks to the cover, but can we license it out and sell it in our bookstores? And for me, it was a no-brainer. So we partnered, and the first week it came out, it became bestseller in Canada and stayed on the bestseller list for 9 months. And that definitely got the attention of, our neighbors down south. And I connected with quite a few publishers, but my agent told me, he said, listen, I'm not going to promise you anything other than if you work with HarperCollins, you'll come out a better writer, because they were going to have me do another pass of the book in terms of the editing, and as well, I was going to write another book afterwards. So I chased the promise of becoming a better writer.
So the book is called Unlearn, 101 Simple Truths for a Better Life. And I'm wondering what your very favorite truth is.
One of my favorite truths is that heartbreaks are essential. And, so many of us live life avoiding failure and avoiding heartbreak, not realizing that our best days and our most important lessons come from failure and heartbreak. Mm-hmm. And it was definitely that moment for me when I was beating myself up for all the irresponsible decisions I made to get myself in such deep debt, to not have any direction with my career, not immediately realizing that, hey, this is important. This is that important part of your story that you'll be able to share in the future to bring value to other people. And, 10 years later, I'm here, and I'm happy that I'm able to share this. But I'm not the only one. I think if any average person looks at their own personal story, their moments of greatness and triumph all came from challenging times and overcoming a challenge, not avoiding it or running away from it.
And you say you stopped seeing your mistakes as failures, but how did you do that?
What I realized is I used to look at failure as the opposite of success. But the reality is failure is a part of the process of success. Failure is pretty much what we're paving the road to success in. And I kind of looked at it a little bit. I took the emotion out of it and started to look at it a little bit more logically. Like, hey, if I was going to do a science experiment, every time things didn't work out the way I wanted, that was still considered progress, because now I know I'm testing and I'm retesting and I'm testing and I'm retesting. And it's the same thing we can apply to our lives. We can try different things, and if things don't work out the first time, it's not the end of the world. We can just try something else. And not staking my identity, not staking my self-worth, and not staking such a big emotional toll into the outcomes of things made a huge difference. So I stopped thinking about the pot of gold, and I started focusing on enjoying the rainbow and asking myself, do I want to be here? Do I want to be doing these things? Is there something else I'd rather be doing? And designing a life that was exciting where the work was a reward, and I wasn't working towards anything else. And that allowed me to become much more journey-oriented and much less focusing on the destination, because we make a lot of promises to ourselves about how we're going to feel if we hit a certain milestone, and we're rarely correct. And the only time I ever feel better than I thought I would is when I'm helping other people.
And you also talk about the dangers of a black and white mindset, and that type of simplistic logic is flawed. And I'm thinking of that because I tend to have that kind of thinking, and I think it's really toxic, because like you said, as long as you're progressing and moving forward, then it really is a success. Do you have any ideas for how to change that black and white mindset?
Yes, definitely. It was a very challenging one for me to do as well. It's recognizing that life is a spectrum. To be funny, 50 Shades of Gray, and everything in between the black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And with those shades, you start to see that nothing is really absolute. And normally that absoluteness, we usually get that when we're really emotional. Like, things never go right for me, or you're always saying those things. And what I realized is, hey, let's live in the middle and let's see what comes from that. And sometimes it's about changing our vocabulary. So for me, one of the words that I've had to abandon recently was the word enough. Am I doing enough? Am I enough? Do they like me enough? Enough is such an arbitrary idea, and it doesn't really take our efforts into consideration. I think our efforts are what matter. Mm-hmm. So I changed it to plenty. Am I doing plenty? Am I achieving plenty? Because plenty really reflects your efforts. And when you realize that you're giving it your all and that's worth celebrating, and just because you scroll on Instagram and somebody else has manufactured an image that looks better than where you're at, that doesn't mean you're not doing plenty. Your baby steps are adding up, and starting today will put you in a better space than it will a year from now. And so often we want to be perfect, but nobody starts out perfect. Everybody we admire continues to make mistakes, and their ability to bounce back from those mistakes or maneuver those mistakes into opportunities are the reason we celebrate them. And I think normally for us is we won't do that because we keep thinking that things have to be perfect. So for me, I also kind of realized, hey, I don't own a crystal ball. I can't spend time judging situations and people that I don't really understand. So I don't know if this is going to be good news or bad news until far off into the future. And I think we all can attest to that in our own lives, where it's once in a while we'll come across something and we'll think it's horrible news, and then it turns out to be something great, and vice versa. Mm-hmm. So I think the longer we spend on this earth, the more experience we achieve. And when we can learn from that experience, that turns into wisdom. So I think for me, it was spending that time to think deeply about it and being like, look, how often am I actually right when I have an emotional reaction to something that didn't go my way? We have expectations, and we're unhappy when the expectations in our head don't match what's happening in front of us. But we only have the control over what's happening in our heads. We don't have much control over the world.
You tell people to ask themselves, do you focus on the people who love you or the ones who won't return your calls? Do you share your problems or your joys with people? Elaborate on those.
I'm very big on our thoughts and our words paint our lives. So I really encourage people to try to go through 24 hours and not complain. I want us to understand more than evaluate. And complaining is generally evaluating our circumstances before we even should. And what ends up happening is the people that we can rely on and have the closest relationships with, we kind of end up dumping our garbage on them, telling them about our bad days. And when they become reliable, we take them for granted and we start focusing on the people who aren't paying attention to us. And I understand where it comes from. It comes from our human need to feel some level of significance. When we can feel significant, we kind of travel towards that. And that can be in forms of counting our followers, counting our likes, but it also comes in the form of self-pity. When we're able to feel sorry for ourselves, we're able to build a connection with ourselves. And that's something that's important, but it also isolates ourselves from other people. So I think it's important that we're mindful of, when we have good people around us, let's celebrate. Let's give them things to be happy about. Let's share the beautiful things in our lives with them, as well as let's not take them for granted. Let's not cancel on them just because they'll be more understanding than the other friend. Instead, we need to pay attention to the people in our lives who are using guilt and shame to kind of keep us in line and address that, because that's not a sustainable way to build a relationship.
How can we improve our relationship with ourselves?
By just the same way we improve our relationships with anybody, by spending more time with ourselves. Whether that's leaving the phone at home and going for a long walk and just being with your thoughts, whether that's sitting quietly with your legs crossed, meditating, whether that's making a list, a gratitude list, or creating a bucket list and rewarding yourself every so often for hitting different milestones in your life. I think learning to be with yourself and not being afraid and so judgmental of the person you are, I think that's the challenge. We know ourselves on such a deep, intimate level, that we feel like if anybody else knew us the way we knew us, they wouldn't like us. Mm-hmm. But the truth is, we're human beings, and we're going to be flawed. We're going to have some unmotivating and uninspiring thoughts once in a while. And some days we're going to be full of energy. Other days we're just going to feel like a big gray cloud. And I think that human experience is okay. And as I said, if we focus more on understanding and spending less time evaluating, it puts us in a position to be open to learning so many new and wonderful things about this experience. And feeling that beauty will only multiply.
You contend that often in life we stick to a script that hasn't been edited in decades. Why do we do that, and how do we change?
I think we're all afraid, and I think rightfully so. I mean, our species has built itself learning from the generations before us. So we're the only animals who can communicate through language and continue learning as we go and passing down ideas and knowledge. And sometimes we get so afraid of the power that we have as individuals and even as a collective that we say, well, the people before us, they didn't really mess anything up. They didn't really blow up the planet. So let's just do what they did.
Mm-hmm. I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah, and that's on serious levels in terms of the way we run the world, but it's also even in terms of sports. Some people talk about hockey. They're like, hey, let's make the blue line thicker. And then old school hockey fans are like, don't touch the blue line. And soccer fans will say, hey, let's introduce instant replays. And other people are like, no, that's against tradition. And we all love nostalgia. We all love what we loved when we were kids. It feels great. And the challenge with that, though, is that's a level of fundamentalism that can get in the way with artistry and innovation. To be an artist is to share new ideas, new concepts, and just new creations with the world. And to be an artist, sometimes you run the risk of offending, crossing people who you didn't even mean to cross. And with people is we take ideas and beliefs and we start to make them our identity. So now if I say, hey, I don't want to celebrate Christmas, I don't want to give out gifts on Christmas, this is too expensive for me, people take that personal. They take it as an attack on Christmas, as an attack on them. And that makes them actually cling harder and dig their feet more into their beliefs. So what we have to do is we have to just kind of pay attention to hey, where did these scripts come from? Because even in my heritage and in my culture, some of the things that my mom tried to pass down to me without her knowing, like these weren't even ancient cultural things. These were things that the British brought when they came 100 years ago to India. And her not having that level of education to realize that, and me just being fortunate to know the right art collectors and historians who can kind of give me that context. And I think because of that, it's just easier to do what's easy, quick, convenient, and cheap. And that's usually the template. It's like, you're hungry, you're tired, let's go get some fast food. If we want to have something healthy, it's going to take a lot more effort and cleaning and preparation to make a healthy meal. And it's the same thing with life. If there's other people who have already told you, hey, listen, you come into this world, you get an education, you get a degree, you get a job, you have 2.5 kids, you take care of them, you get them educated, you get them married, and you hope they give you grandkids, and then the cycle continues. There's a template there, which is fine. I think the majority of society, we're required to kind of live this way. But every so often, we can find elements of our unique self that deserve being celebrated. And if that means deviating a little bit, I get to live life on my own terms to an extent. I still have to pay taxes like everybody else. I still have to stand in line like everybody else, but I may have other freedoms afforded to me. And I think acknowledging that myself as an individual is worth celebrating, but my responsibilities to the collective are also worth celebrating. And when I first started, all my biggest resistance came from people within my culture because they had never seen a guy with tattoos on his neck and rapping and swearing and them saying, look, man, you're making us look bad. And me realizing that, hey, I can conform to people's interpretation of culture, or I can take my rightful place as an influencer and start to influence culture with some responsibility in mind, knowing that, I do have nieces and nephews, and it is important that I think about what I do before I do it, but at the same time, encouraging people to live their most authentic life.
In chapter 52, you talk about not letting somebody else write your own story. And I'm wondering what advice you would have for somebody who is struggling right now to find their place in the world.
So I'm a big believer in storytelling as a responsibility of every human being. I believe that you don't have to earn the right to share your story. I believe it's your responsibility. The same way 50,000 years ago, we were drawing on caves to warn others of potential predators, how to make fire, how the situation was wherever they were. And I feel like we have to do the same things. We have to share our stories so other people can find their stories. And I feel like if you can't find your own story, read up on other people's stories. Think about the people you admire. If it's Michael Jordan, go read the Michael Jordan autobiography. If it's Phil Knight, who created Nike, go read Shoe Dog. For me, it was Malcolm X. So the autobiography of Malcolm X, reading about his life helped me create my own story in my own life. Read, read, read. The best way to be a writer is to be a reader. And it's the same thing when it comes to life. If you want to learn how to live your life, pay attention to how other people are living their lives. Take what agrees with you naturally, discard the rest, and learn from as many people as possible. Every single human being is a potential innovator, and every single human being we come across is also a teacher.
I love the fact that you say emotions are related to chemicals in your brain, and a few paragraphs from a rhyming beardo may not suffice. Don't ever be afraid to seek help if you start to feel helpless and overwhelmed. You say that you have. Tell us more about that.
I was still a student, actually. I was just falling in class, and I had no idea why. So I just went to the doctor, and I said, hey, my energy's low. I'm vegetarian, so I might have low iron. I know other people do. And he ran a bunch of tests, and he came back. So everything on the test, but I want to ask if you've ever struggled with depression. And I'm not depressed. And he said, I think that might have a lot to do with your energy. And he goes, it might actually be in your family. And I said, well, I'm not sad. And he goes, depression doesn't manifest itself simply because you're sad. It manifests itself in other ways for different people, whether it be loss of appetite, loss of energy. And I think that was the first time I kind of looked at depression as something a little bit more medical than simply a philosophical idea where if somebody's depressed, you can just say the right things and cheer them up. So with this book, I wrote this to help me. These words only saw the light of day when they helped reignite a flame in me. I was very frustrated with the empty Tumblr quotes I was coming across, and I didn't want to sell hope. I felt hope was very hollow, and I wanted to have a very pragmatic approach to feeling better about my life. And I realized that once I figured out the words to make myself feel better in the long run, not just saying something fluffy that would make me feel good for 5 minutes, I needed to share that. And it was very important for me to be at the same time telling people that, hey, if you're dealing with some deep clinical depression, I'm not here to say that we can cure it by reading a book. But what we can do is this book can be the motivator for you to make that appointment. This book can be that motivator for you to do a little additional research and, maybe make some changes to your diets or maybe make some changes to your environment and the people you hang out with. I really wanted this book to motivate people to ask the right questions instead of them just simply hoping that they're holding all the answers in their hands.
You're somebody who has been such a positive influence on social media and on people of all ages. And I'm wondering what advice you would have for young people who are trying to have a good relationship with social media and who maybe don't know how to see it, whether it's a good influence in their life or a bad influence in their life. How can they see it like you have made it?
I'm extremely fortunate that my proverbial cleavage that I'm showing off on social media are kind of my ideas, and I'm kind of celebrated for that. Gotten to a point where my quotes get more attention than my pictures, and I'm very grateful for that because it just motivates me to dig deeper and be more vulnerable with my thoughts and my feelings, which I don't feel is too damaging to me as a person. I don't have to manufacture a moment the way some other people have to do on social media. I used to look at social media as a double-edged sword where some parts of it were good for you, some parts of it were bad for you. I'm starting to lean that more of it's bad than good. It's fast food for connection. It allows us to feel connection very quickly and get little dopamine drops every time we count a like or every time we see some cool pictures. But the problem is that demotivates us to build real connections or deeper connections with people, the type of connections that require work, the type of connections where you don't have the option to swipe right when things aren't going well. And I would really challenge, including the kids in my life, my nieces and my nephews, really challenge them to spend more time being self-aware of that and realizing their emotional relationship to social media. I think we've passed the point where you can exist without it and feel like there's a real world and a social media world. I think for Generation Z, it's all the same thing. For them, being on the phone with their friends is the same thing as seeing them in person. And that's not a wave we can fight, but building self-awareness, understanding why we have the urge to pick up our phones is no different than understanding why we have the urge to eat another potato chip. You know, there's sodium and salt in it. It's addictive. This is a chemical thing. And being more aware of it can help us, maybe even just a baby step, be more prepared to deal with the challenges that come with it. And what we consume through our media is the same thing as we consume in our diet. And we have to make healthy choices. And healthy choices isn't simply saying, hey, well, I promised myself not to look at my phone as much. For me, my healthy choices have been buying an alarm clock, so I don't look at my phone the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning. I actually have two phones. I have one phone that has all my social media and all the junk food, and then I have my other phone, and that's black and white. And that has next to no apps on there, and that's where I do the work. And then social media, I try to jump into the belly of the beast maybe once or twice a day. Just being cognizant of that and sharing stories that when I was in Kenya and we had no Wi-Fi, it felt so good to be visceral and to be around real things for a long time without the distractions. But the moment I came home, the moment I got access to social media, it was like eating a bag of chips again. So I think it's not about lecturing young kids. It's about just trying to encourage a level of self-awareness where they see that, hey, this is kind of like eating McDonald's every day. It tastes good in the moment, but then I feel a little bit crappy. Mm-hmm. So social media is the same way. If it's too quick, easy, and convenient, in the long run, it's going to do damage.
Humble, our show is called Nobody Told Me, and we always ask our guests, what is your Nobody Told Me lesson? So what is it? You have 101 in the book Unlearn, but what's the thing that really sticks out in your mind as something that you had to learn on your own and you kind of wish somebody had told you about before and you'd like to maybe pass on to others?
Oh, definitely. True freedom only exists in discipline. I guess it was a combination of, wow, nobody ever told me that, and a combination of like, wow, that is probably the most inconvenient truth I've ever heard.
It is.
I have worked so hard to be free of so many things and to only realize that true freedom isn't the freedom to sit down and kick your feet up and do nothing, but true freedom means to choose the challenges in your life. But the challenges are there. We will never solve the problem of having problems. Every time we do something, we're going to create a potential challenge. And realizing that all the media and movies and TV that I've ever watched have always promised me a happy ever after. And things can have an ending, but that's not how real life works. And real life works is always the day after. Mm-hmm. There's the day after the breakup. There's the day after winning the lottery. And there's the day after every other situation that happens in between. And realizing that, hey, as I've graduated from starving artist to middle-class artist to, hey, we have a little bit of cushion in the bank account now artist, realizing that, hey, this isn't going to solve any of my problems and let me live stress-free. This is just going to give me some room to tackle projects and problems that I care about. And I'm still going to have to make myself uncomfortable, and I'm still going to have to really push my limits. And I'm okay with that. It's like when we go to the gym. If you have an easy day at the gym, then you probably didn't have an effective day at the gym. Mm-hmm. So I'm not looking to have an easy life from my success. I'm learning to have an effective life. And I realized that, hey, I've knocked off a lot of things on my bucket list, but none of those things made me as happy as when I was able to do something really cool for somebody I cared about or had an impact on our culture and society as a whole. And these are the things that excite me. And I realize there's very little resistance when you want to help other people. So I really enjoy being of service on that level. And at the same time, having my fun. I get to do a lot of cool things. I'm very fortunate. I get to meet a lot of really cool people. And now I feel like I've graduated to the point where I see all these cool experiences. I'm the son of a cab driver. My father immigrated to Toronto, Canada in the 70s. And we don't have any artists in our family. We don't have any entrepreneurs in our family. So I see it as a responsibility that I've been able to create so much that I want to be able to start laying a blueprint down for people in the South Asian community, children of immigrants, young budding entrepreneurs who are millennials, anybody who wants to be a lifelong learner. And it's not simply, hey, just be inspired and chase your passions. It's like, hey, I was able to do this. It took 10 years, and I worked a lot harder at this than I've worked at anything else. And realizing that, hey, if I want that freedom, I have to have a discipline towards it, and I have to sign up to be uncomfortable, whether I'm paying a trainer to kick my butt in the gym or whether I'm choosing to take a cold shower instead of a warm one.
Mm-hmm. Oh, my gosh. I think your advice is so wonderful, and we would love to get as many people to read the book as possible. So how can people learn more about the book, and how can they connect with you and hear more of your words of wisdom?
Yes, so the book is called Unlearn, 101 Simple Truths for a Better Life. It's available everywhere books are being sold. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, at your local indie bookstore. Indie bookstores matter. And I performed the entire book in Audible. You know, being a rapper gave me some studio time, so we made the Audible version very fun. Also, if you want to find it directly from me, just go to humblethepoet.com. On my website, you can find a link to the book. I'm everywhere on social media, as much as I discuss the challenges with it. I also write about the challenges with it on there, and somebody always brings that up in my comments. They're like, well, why are you on social media telling us to spend less time on social media? But
you're a positive influence on there. If you have to spend time looking at social media, look at Humble the Poet.
Yes. Look at Humble the Poet and cute puppies, and you will have a great day.
That's all you need.
So they need to follow Humble the Poet, at Humble the Poet. I'm Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, everywhere. I'm Humble the Poet. And I have fun bringing a lot of stuff, and I take pictures of my beard as well, for those who are interested in that. It's all about sharing and building a community. And I probably have the nicest people following me. So if you read my comment section, it's also not a toxic place, which we can't say for a lot of social media.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Humble, thank you so much for joining us. This has really been a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Our thanks to Humble the Poet. Again, his book is called Unlearn, 101 Simple Truths for a Better Life, and his website is humblethepoet.com. I'm Jan Black.
And I'm Laura Owens.
You're listening to Nobody Told Me. Thank you so much for joining us.